Henry, thank you. Should a boss date or even be able to date their employees? The Liberal government's new harassment legislation does not include plans to ban or monitor sexual relationships between MPs and their staffers. We are joined this morning by Alex Lucifero of Samfiru Tumarkin LLP. Good morning, Alex. Thanks for coming in. Okay, let's start with this question, and this is maybe more geared towards the private sector. Can an employer ban a relationship between staff members that works for them?
It's a good question. I mean, we have to keep in mind that the premise here and the goal here, first and foremost, is that employers have to protect employees from discrimination and from sexual harassment in the workplace. So that's the goal that we've got to keep in mind when we're talking about workplace romance. Effectively, the answer to your question is yes, it's possible to outright ban workplace relationships. It's not a good idea, in my opinion. I think bans are archaic. And I think they don't actually work. It's been proven, actually, that they don't work. They simply drive relationships underground, and that actually presents its own problems.
Can that eventually lead to a termination for employees?
So in a situation where there's a policy in place with respect to workplace relationships, and specifically, I would say, where the relationship is between a manager and a subordinate employee.
Okay.
That is potentially, if not outright in and of itself, a conflict of interest. And if there's a policy against that, yes, that absolutely can lead to a termination.
Okay, so let's talk. The Liberal government's new harassment legislation does not include plans, as we mentioned there earlier, to ban relationships between MPs and their staffers.
That's right.
So in this Me Too era that we are talking about, is this the wrong move?
I think the sentiment is correct, Annette. I think the approach is wrong. I actually agree that legislation is not the answer in a case like this. I think it would be very difficult to legislate a specific employer and a specific employee and referring to members of parliament and their staff. I think the answer is, though, that those MPs and those governmental offices do need to put policies in place with respect to managing and disclosing those kinds of relationships. I think it's extremely important. There is potentially an abuse of power situation there between an MP and a staffer. And again, it creates a potential conflict of interest. And not only creates a conflict of interest, it gives the perception of a conflict of interest, and that cannot be good for the workplace. Okay,
so the government doesn't have a ban on relationships between MPs and staffers in this legislation. So then what do, let's say, staffers have as a backup against harassment? Do they have anything to protect them?
So from what we've seen so far under Bill C-65, employees on Parliament Hill are going to have the option to go to the Labour Department under the Canada Labour Code to file complaints and have Canada Labour Code investigators investigate situations where allegations of harassment are being made. I'm of the view that a more independent investigation or advisor would be beneficial in cases like that. But ultimately, those protections will be in place. MPs will have to implement policies that mirror the provisions of the Canada Labour Code. Is it enough? I don't think so. I think MPs are going to have to step up and form their own policies and really put their money where their mouth is.
Let's talk about what Facebook and Google did last week, where they announced that they have a policy in place for their staffers, their employees, that it's a one-time ask. That if a staff member wants to ask another staff member out, if they say no, that's it. It's done. They cannot ask again or risk termination because it's going against company policy. Do you agree with that?
It's an interesting particular piece of policy. I actually agree with it. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's certainly not enough. It's certainly not in and of itself an answer. That particular provision is going to have to come with a comprehensive romantic relationship workplace policy. It simply is not going to cut it. And that in and of itself, let's imagine a manager who asks a subordinate out. If that individual employee says no, well, is that person then going to be treated differently because they refused an offer? So those issues and those abuses of power, potential abuses of power, have to be addressed.
All right, Alex Lucifero, thank you so much from Samfiru Tumarkin LLP. Appreciate your time on this subject today.